massive, systematic, and dangerous. Along with a number of UN Special Rapporteurs, I have recently expressed grave and growing concerns regarding the deteriorating situation of religious freedom and human rights in India.
This was Dr. Fernand de Varennes, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on minority issues. In his speech during a hearing on religious freedom in India, he said that violence against minorities in India is not local or individual, but systematic. Now, these are alarming statements coming from the person assigned by the United Nations to solely look at minorities around the world. So what did this UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues say in his speech at the US Commission on International Religious Freedom in Washington, D.C. and why it should concern us all? Find out in the video. Hello, I am Zishan Kaskar and you are watching The Wire. US Commission on International Religious Freedom, which we will here on refer to as USCIRF, called upon a hearing in religious freedom in India and how the US government can work with the Indian government to address the violations. USCIRF is an agency that monitors the universal right to freedom of religion and makes policy recommendations to the US government. In the hearing, the main panelist was Dr. Fernand de Varennes, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on minority issues. He spoke about the erosion of fundamental rights of religious minorities, how the state has made a mockery of freedom of religion, how there has been an increase in hate crimes against the minorities, how there has been inaction from authorities in Manipur, and how the increasing violence, which is left unchallenged by authorities, is slowly closing to being a genocide. Mind you, these are all the words of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on minority issues. Their role is to regularly assess and verify complaints from alleged victims of human rights violations. Thus, it becomes essential to listen to what Dr. Varennes had to say after assessing the state of minorities in India. We compiled some of the important bits from the US Commission on International Religious Freedom program. Stay tuned to watch what Dr. Varennes had to say.
The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, is an independent, bipartisan U.S. government advisory body created by the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act, or IRFA. The Commission uses international standards to monitor freedom of religion or belief abroad and makes policy recommendations to the U.S. government. Today, USCIRF exercises its statutory authority under IRFA to convene this important hearing. Religious freedom conditions in India have notably declined in recent years. Since 2020, USCIRF has recommended the State Department designate India as a country of particular concern, or CPC, for its systematic, ongoing, and egregious religious freedom violations, including the Indian government's promotion and enforcement of laws and policies that target religious minorities. Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Dalits, Adivasis are experiencing increased levels of attacks and acts of intimidation. The national government has continued to suppress minority voices and those advocating on their behalf through surveillance, harassment, demolition of property, and detention under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. These trends and their implication for U.S. foreign policy should not be ignored. It's important to note that this hearing is taking place just months after Prime Minister Narendra Modi's high-profile state visit to Washington, D.C., where he met with President Biden and addressed the joint session of Congress. When directly asked about India's treatment of religious minorities during a White House press conference, Prime Minister Modi responded that, quote, "There is no space for discrimination," unquote, in India, and suggested that steps did not need to be taken to advance religious freedom in the country. Yet, for the past several years, religious freedom conditions in India have continued in a downward trend, capturing international attention and highlighting the need for continuing discussions and engagement on policy options for advancing religious freedom in the country. In the last few months alone, attacks against the country's Muslim and Christian minority communities have been particularly concerning. In July, violence erupted between Hindus and Muslims following a Hindu procession in the Muslim neighborhood of near New Delhi. During the unrest, the mosque was torched and a deputy imam was killed. Hundreds of Muslim homes were demolished and Muslim-owned businesses were targeted with widespread calls for boycotts. Unfortunately, these kinds of incidents and call for violence against minority groups are becoming more and more common. Dr. Fernand de Varennes is, since 2017, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues. As part of his mandate, he is the reference point at the UN on the protection of human rights of national or ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities. He is also adjunct and visiting professor at the National University of Ireland, Galway, a visiting professor at the Université Catholique de Lyon in France, and at the European Regional MA in Democracy and Human Rights in SEEC, Global Campus, Southeast Europe, University of Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. That's quite a business card alone. He completed his law degrees in Canada, the UK, and the Netherlands. He's the author of some 300 publications that have appeared in more than 30 languages, is acknowledged as a renowned global leading expert on human rights of minorities, and has been awarded a number of accolades, including the 2021 prize of the Federalist Union of European Nationalities, the 2004 Lingua Pa Award, Barcelona, Spain, the Knight's Cross of the Order of Merit of the Republic of Poland, and the Tip O'Neill Peace Fellowship in Northern Ireland. We are honored that you've been able to join us this morning for give us an overview of an extremely complicated and an extremely important issue. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Cooper. The honor is mine. Distinguished commissioners, good morning, bonjour. We sometimes tend to focus so much on the trees that we don't see the forest. Let me summarize, I think, the situation with 3 words: massive, systematic, and dangerous. Along with a number of UN Special Rapporteurs, I have recently expressed grave and growing concerns regarding the deteriorating situation of religious freedom and human rights in India. We have, in the last decade, for example, issued numerous communications and press releases, communications being allegations of human rights violations that are raised through diplomatic channels to the concerned governments. They show a steady and alarming erosion of fundamental rights, particularly for religious and other minorities, when we reviewed communications from about 2011 to today. By last year, 2022, almost all of them involved grave allegations of denial of fundamental rights, particularly targeting religious minorities. And for example, from the 12th of May 2020 to just a few months ago, May 2023, we had about 46 communications and an estimated 20 press releases involving India, and most of these involving minorities, the vast majority of these. The most recent example, the most recent communication that we issued is perhaps symptomatic. On the 4th of September, myself and 18 other colleagues expressed our alarm about reports of serious human rights violations in Manipur, including alleged acts of sexual violence, extrajudicial killings, forced displacement, and other ill treatment, where the victims were from the predominantly Christian Kuki or Kukai minority last May. Now, there are dry statistics. I could say there were 160 persons reportedly killed by mid-August. Thousands of homes and hundreds of churches have been burnt down, and some of you will have heard of a video which circulated on social media of 2 women from the Christian Kuki community being paraded naked, beaten, then brought to a field and allegedly gang raped. Let's go to the field. Let's go on the ground and perhaps describe more accurately what happened. There was inaction from authorities until this video caught the international attention. I saw that video, and what it showed was hatred directed against women because they were considered a threat, unworthy, less human, because they belonged to a despised religious and ethnic minority. That's why they were raped. That's why they were beaten. It was only after the shock and outcry and pressure from the outside that men from the Hindu majority were finally arrested and charged. By the way, these individuals for months circulated freely and behaved with complete impunity for months, despite the highly visible, public, and horrific nature of what occurred. And this, unfortunately, is not an isolated incident. We receive multitudes of reports of attacks, rapes, lynchings of members of religious minorities. We also have reports of national, state, and local religiously discriminatory policies and legislation targeting, well, amongst others, and you've mentioned some of these, Chair, religious conversion, interfaith relationships, the killing of cows, the wearing of hijabs, and other practices that restrict and prohibit religious beliefs or practices of minorities mainly. And all of these make a mockery of freedom of religion and non-discrimination guarantees for these religious and other minorities. Now, let me repeat. India risks becoming, in my opinion, based on the information I've received and the allegations we've received, it risks becoming one of the world's main generators of instability, atrocities, and violence because of the massive scale and gravity of the violations and abuses targeting, not exclusively, but mainly religious and other minorities, such as Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and others. It's not just individual or local. It is systematic and a reflection of, well, I guess the best description is religious nationalism. There is a discriminatory citizenship determination process in Assam, which many of you will know about in detail, but potentially also other regions of the world. Assam is a model being looked at very closely in other parts of India, and this we should be very concerned with. But this process could lead to millions being denied citizenship, and mainly, not exclusively again, but mainly from the Muslim minority community. And this process has to be seen also in the light of the 1999 Citizenship Amendment Act, which provides a fast track to citizenship for individuals unless you're a Muslim. Now, there's a religious test here, which does not sit well with democratic values and fundamental international human rights. Now, there are fears expressed by many that this may be part of an effort to create a religious and discriminatory test for citizenship. The disenfranchisement of millions also, again mainly Muslims because of their religion, has occurred through the revocation in 2019 of the special status of autonomy of Jammu and Kashmir. Now under the direct control of the central Indian government, this really means that the local elected bodies have been discarded, and the right of political participation and representation of, once again, mainly Muslim and other minorities in Jammu and Kashmir has effectively been stripped away. And they've lost many of their previous political rights. A study noted recently that there has been a staggering increase, a 786% increase in hate crimes against minorities between 2014 and 2018. It is also widely acknowledged that hate speech and content inciting violence against religious minorities in social media is widespread, increasing, vitriolic, and involving incitement to violence and even calls to genocide. And not always, but we could say generally, these are largely left unchallenged by state authorities.
You personally, and I think it's important personally because your view, do you personally believe that Prime Minister Modi could change what is taking place in India And part of that question, does Prime Minister Modi care about what you and others are saying about him?
I wish I knew. I would answer, Commissioner, in the following way. Politically, it may, if pressure can be exercised by United Nations, the United Nations, independent experts, and especially national governments, on the Indian government and Prime Minister Modi, there is potential, or there's always a possibility of a change of direction, of delaying certain actions that are quite clearly massive and perhaps even atrocious, if that's the correct word. Therefore, politically, it may be able to exercise enough pressure to convince the Modi government that the time has come to actually change certain policies. One should never underestimate the possible impact of international pressure, especially coming from allies of the United States. The case of Manipur, I think that I illustrated, is an example of this. It was because of international attention, and I would say pressure, that you have a number of men who have committed the atrocities and the alleged rape of the Kuki women. It was only after this international focus appeared that state authorities in India actually proceeded to the arrest of those who may have been the perpetrators. So I think politically there is a great deal that could be done, but it is, one has to admit, and I personally view it, that necessary to put pressure on the Modi government, on Prime Minister Modi at many different levels. And I take this opportunity as if I may. I noticed that you had a hearing on the status of Tajikistan. I am going to Tajikistan on a country mission, as a matter of fact, in a few weeks. I do know the situation in Tajikistan. The situation in Tajikistan pales when we look at the massive and the degree of atrocities committed in India on the basis of religion. And so if it seems that if one country such as Tajikistan is a country of particular concern, given what we know about India, the logic would seem to suggest that India should be considered along those lines.
Who in the world has the ability to sit down and say, dear Mr. Prime Minister, this is not good, and for your future and for the future of India, for the good, can you appeal to his better angels? And who could do that, do you believe? Thank you. And again, thank you. I've learned a lot. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm an optimist. By the way, in my job, you have to be an optimist to be involved in human rights. There's a saying, I'm not sure how to translate this in English, but you always have to be honest when you're dealing with friends or allies in order to make sure that they behave in the right way. And the United States is a very close ally to India. It is a democracy, and as a democracy, I think there are much that needs to be said in all frankness and honesty. In my view, it is for the government of the United States to be very frank here and indicate that there are serious areas of concern. And as a friend and an ally, these have to be addressed in order to ensure, well, peace, stability, and justice. Because if we don't have that, we are heading towards, as I said, a massive, dangerous situation in India. And this will have repercussions on the United States.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.